All right, this is Causes of Genocide by Lewis Sun, Bo Ferguson, and Gabe Nissen.
Contextualization. So genocide was first began with the classification of people into racial groups, and then symbols were used to pinpoint these races. So, for example, Jewish people had to wear yellow stars on their clothes to indicate that they were Jews. And then after the symbols, the racial groups were then dehumanized with political reforms that diminished and eradicated their rights, such as the laws passed before the Armenian genocide. And then genocides began to become more organized by the government and then polarized by the government with more genocides and violent acts. And then eventually preparation for bigger genocides began and they were eventually legalized. And afterwards, after genocides had ended, they were usually denied by the government and evidence was usually hidden.
Thesis: leaders in societies used industrialized weapons and facilitation of propaganda to assert national strength, which unified countries as nationalist movements began, targeting racial groups that were dehumanized by leaders, which led to higher levels of depersonalized violence, including genocide during World War II.
Industrialization of weaponry. So the industrialization started a little bit before this war, but this was basically the first World War that had a lot of modern technologies like fast steam engines for transportation of soldiers, as well as planes, more advanced planes in this war. There were tanks, especially the German tanks called Panzers were really powerful. There was also Gatling and Maxim guns, which were like weapons of mass destruction. And these weapons were used to control the Jews during the Holocaust, and they instilled fear, such as like shooting protesters or shooting the defiant people. Also, engines allowed for mass transport of Jews to concentration camps and basically just silenced those who tried to speak out.
Media during World War II. Because of new forms of media that were emerging throughout World War II and all of Europe, the population was allowed access to news and which allowed for the spread of dehumanization of specific minority groups. For example, the radio, which could be found in a majority of German households in World War II, allowed for Hitler's influence to become quicker and anybody could hear him from anywhere in Germany. And propaganda posters, which were put up on any street corner across the entirety of Germany, depicted Jewish people as inhumane and abnormal, which created a norm to brainwash German citizens.
Nationalism. So during this time, mechanized weapons and propaganda led to national movements targeting demonized races. So an example of this was Hitler and the Jewish Holocaust. Hitler was able to unify Germany by fixing Germany's economic and political problems through industrialization. And this industrialization, as mentioned earlier, allowed them to have better weapons, which allowed them to conquer other countries. And this gave Hitler the trust he needed from the German people to agree on his view of Jews, which eventually led to the Holocaust. The Armenian genocide was another example. And here the Young Turks first dehumanized the Armenians by passing two laws, which were the law of appropriation and the law of deportation. The first law allowed for the Turks to take property away from Armenians, and the second law allowed for Armenians to be deported. These two laws and the Young Turk Revolution gave the Young Turks power in the government, which allowed for nationalists to exterminate and ultimately genocide the Armenians.
So analysis. Overall, the takeaways from this presentation are the three main changes in the world at the time that made genocide possible were the development of military technology. As it says here, World War II was a much different war than World War One. There was more technology, transport, weapons of mass destruction compared to the old trench warfare. A lot of nationalism, nationalist movements, and propaganda to unify people under one national identity. Hitler even brainwashed a lot of people to become Nazis and do the terrible things that he wanted them to do. And finally, media, faster travel of information let Hitler gain a bigger following faster. And he had a giant influence on the Germans and convinced them that the Jews were bad people.
And all of these are similar because they all unified the country and its views, which allowed them to genocide certain races. That's it, and thank you for listening to our presentation.